8 months ago, I released a video filled with my terrible acting called The Ultimate Beginner's Guide to Warhammer 40k, and only yesterday did I finally add timestamps to it. This video will be next if you're in my Warhammer playlist, but if not, it's linked below in the description box. It goes over every possible faction you could think of, 40 by my count, in the 40k universe. I think you'll find that it goes into, well, even more obscure parts of the universe that your favorite content creator probably doesn't. When I originally released this video, I was only just hearing about how the politically motivated push for female space marines was a thing, and then the horrible copyright attacks from Games Workshop towards all of its content creators, and the awful beginnings or launch period of Age of Sigmar. I didn't really hear about the reforms that were coming out about it, thus I didn't really hear about how it was changing for the better. This channel was originally called 40k 101, and my original plan was to do reviews of every Horus Heresy book. However, all of these things, from the political warring by fans over various issues, GW attacking the fans while seemingly taking a very real side against the ones who actually bought their products, and me thinking AOS was going to turn Warhammer Fantasy into a generic D&D clone, made me quit caring about the universe for some time. I had only just gotten into it and thought it wasn't worth my time if I'm going to be cut off from enjoying the product at every turn by people who made said product. The reason I'm coming back to look through the property is that Age of Sigmar seemed to get some good lore refinements, Warhammer 40k fans still seem to have the same community, for better or worse, despite certain out-of-touch content creators trying to speak for them, and I just like the mythology present in all three settings. Here I'm going to address each one and what I like about it, Warhammer 40k. Alright, so this is the one I'll probably spend the most time on in the form of video making, and it was my gateway into more speculative fiction settings after the death of Star Wars at the hands of Rian Johnson. That franchise was totally ruined for me. The key draw for me and many others here is mythology of the Emperor, rather, the mythology of the Emperor and his sons, the Primarchs. The life story of the Emperor is his very, very human flaws, and the grand scale of his fight has all the same themes of uphill struggle and deeply consequence-heavy magic that make me like the Conan universe. I also have to thank GW for its terrible behavior, because without that break I took from Warhammer, I would never have gotten more into Conan's larger universe, which I am now more deeply invested in. It really feels like the theme of Conan, which I would describe as endless self-improvement in the face of uphill battles, but on a grander scale. For Conan, this is represented by being a survivor barbarian, then a conqueror leading a revolution, and finally a king. The Emperor, he starts as a tribal survivor like Conan to some degree, but with strong psychic powers. Then he gathers his power over time, reaching the title of warlord, so he has to do his own battling and his own fighting. Then he has to, of course, he's making deals with the Chaos Gods. He's doing all these various things that require this kind of look into the void and look into the world of magic and coming out stronger, and it's very Odinistic, where you have to impale yourself to gain power. Then World Conqueror, taking his name for the first time, and ironically, for those who know his self-described mission in his early life to destroy religion to weaken the Chaos Gods, he would become a god by means of legend. This is also a theme we see in Conan, using examples of Crom, who in that canon, or rather, every time I say Conan canon, was once an actual person. However, in Warhammer, this belief, or rather the belief itself in the Emperor, quite literally makes him, to some degree, an actual deity. Remember, speculative fiction is another way of saying sci-fi fantasy. So, in this universe, these fantasy rules of chaos, which is belief equaling power, and religious belief and the religious instinct equaling power. And also, I always love that when it comes to chaos in the Warhammer 40k, Warhammer Fantasy, or Age of Sigmar universe, because it literally, it calls to that. It calls to faith having actual power and consequences. The feel is the same, but the scale is infinitely grander. I once said that Conan is a subject I like to cover because of the fan community surrounding it. What I'm referring to in this is the self-improvement and fitness crowd that is attracted to the material. The same contingent has existed around me back when I was deep into 40k as well. To those who deadlift for the Emperor or study exercise science for Fabius Bile, I support you. I look forward to the good influence you will have on me and others in the comments. Age of Sigmar. All right. So, as you may have guessed, I'm not usually a war gamer, and I'm a huge fan of the Warhammer 40k audiobooks and books. The lore, short stories, and fan fiction written by people like Voldemort really make the Warhammer 40k world come alive to me, making it very inspirational. It's very much that uphill battle I was talking about before. I can honestly say, with what I've heard about the Age of Sigmar community and its current incarnation, that this is the first version of the Warhammer Fantasy universe I could actually see myself wanting to play the war game aspect of. This is due to them fleshing out, combining, and expanding my favorite factions in the old world. My favorite Chaos worshippers, the Beastmen, who are now called the Beasts of Chaos, giving them a large number of new Chimera-like forms, which I am very, very grateful for in the lore, as previously they were only limited to bovine body morphs. AOS makes it more than just variations on Minotaurs. Secondly are my favorite Chaos Hunters, which are the Lizardmen, who are always, I always felt like they needed their own universe in the old world setting, and now they have it. The setting of AOS is split into separate universes or realms, giving each faction much more time in the far more high fantasy setting to explore their societies and cultures. It would have been so easy for them to destroy or break Warhammer Fantasy with a shift to a more high fantasy setting rather than the historical fantasy people are used to, but they somehow managed to pull it off. Stormcast Eternals were also something I thought I would hate, but as it turns out, they are a very well done faction and something else to add to the options of what to play instead of trying to force female Space Marines into existence. This is a fun setting that can give people that experience without taking away from the inherent grimdark unfairness of 40k if they want it. I'd happily play in this universe just because it's exactly what I need to genuinely get into the old world or find the old world more interesting in its fantasy elements, because the grounded elements do have the effect of making the human characters more appealing. It does have the effect of making a human-centric universe, and Warhammer Fantasy: The Old World, I would say is still the good fantasy counterpart to the speculative fiction setting of Warhammer 40k. Again, it seems like the tournament community, from what I hear, is very charity-focused and has a good sense of sportsmanship, that, nobody's yelling at each other. Because, I'll be honest, one of the things that I always wanted to avoid with getting into the war game was just the thought of, getting into this with somebody who, spends their whole life on it, and just like seeing them freak out, or maybe I have poor sportsmanship, something like that. But when there's just those good vibes and that healthy community, which is what I always hear from everyone who talks about Age of Sigmar. I always hear that everyone's a good sport about things. There's not a lot of people who go, oh man, this is terrible. Everyone's having a good time. It seems like whether you're the losing side or the winning side, there is a lot of action-heavy focus here after watching a few games and trying to learn about it. Very fun. The Old World. So I'm sorry to say that I can't really say much about the Old World. Most people's experience in this universe will obviously come from the Total War Warhammer games, of which one was just released. In that regard, I would say the Chaos Gods are my favorite thing about the universe, but all three settings have those. I would say that my favorite factions are the Beastmen, Skaven, and Lizardmen, but all those factions have been given room and more complexity in AOS. What the setting did well was grounded fantasy. You had hobbit tobacco farmers who were frequently lynched out of bigotry in the lore. I'm not sure why, but I'm deeply connected to that feeling when you're 5'10". When you have that kind of anything below 6 foot, when you have that kind of setting, it does something good to the undead. I think that AOS does for a lot of the beast factions or the high fantasy factions what the old world did for the Tomb Kings and vampire counts, the undead. I deeply love their lore and how it's intertwined. The idea of ancient Egyptian necromancy moving into European vampirism is very interesting to me, and that just isn't something you can get in a world with multiple universes. By that I don't mean like the lore being connected or anything like that, but in a land with multiple universes, you're talking about an extremely high fantasy, extremely expansive setting, and having the direct parallels of Egypt and Transylvania, which exist in the old world, that just doesn't exist there. Sometimes it also feels like I'm the only person in the world that actually likes Bretonia, due to their half Lovecraftian, half Arthurian mythos of the lady. Is she a chaos god or not? Are werewolves from chaos or not? We don't know. That's one of the problems with the setting. But in some cases, it adds a certain adds to a certain faction's mystique, and I'm sure that's what a lot of people miss about this setting going into Age of Sigmar, which is this somewhat clearly defined fantasy world with lore you can actually say A goes to B. I'd say if I like 40K for the stories and could see myself playing Age of Sigmar, then I like the old world for just learning about the lore. It all feels very academic and official despite the conflicting reports. And that's all. This video just exists to get some things off my chest and remind myself of what I liked so much about this universe to originally start a channel over it. 40K is a beautiful amalgam of mythology and all of human history. Age of Sigmar is the themes of chaos or warp travel, I guess, amped up to 11 with the multiple universes or realms. And the old world is a place where you can tell very grounded horror stories while also still having the setting being fantasy technically. Each has its own good or bad fans, each is haunted by an evil corporation, and each is a grimdark setting to varying degrees that you can get behind. Well, in the case of Age of Sigmar, it's more high fantasy, but honestly, it is so refreshing because it's something that you really do want to see with a lot of the higher fantasy elements. I would say, okay, so in super summary, 40K does speculative fiction for me right. It does a lot for me. It's the reason it's the universe I'd primarily focus on. I don't usually get into sci-fi or things that take place just generally in a predicted future, and usually when I do, it's very grounded. Legend of the Galactic Heroes, if you knew that show, it was basically just what if humans were in the future and they had spaceships, but that was the only real thing, and sort of terraformed things, but that was the only real thing about them. There weren't any aliens in that setting. And this is the first one where it just feels... I almost don't consider Legend of the Galactic Heroes a real sci-fi because it's almost just very predictable as to how humans would develop throughout history. But when it comes to 40K, I absolutely love it. Absolutely love it. 100%. It's my main thing. The old world, I think, does the undead the best. I think it does horror the best. Obviously, the Beastmen, and what I like about them being so fleshed out in Age of Sigmar, being so diverse and interesting there, and Chaos really having this space to grow and space to look at Chaos and look at because you have so much more there's so much more you can do with the realms of chaos in Age of Sigmar because of the realms being divided. I like that so much. And then when it comes to the old world, however, when we're comparing the Beastmen, it would be like, okay, in the old world, the Beastmen are clearly horror-based. They exist to gore and kill. Gore is in most of their names. They're Ungors and Gorgors and Gorbibors and all that gore. So they exist to solely be murder machines. They may as well be werewolves themselves. And then with Age of Sigmar, of course, there's going to be more diversity to that. I look forward to seeing how the different beasts of chaos interact with each other. I look forward to seeing how all of these things play out. So they're all good for different things. If you want a kind of Renaissance setting, and I also think that's one of the things that would make me go to Age of Sigmar over the old world just because... and again, it's not like I'm really comparing the two because all three of them have their own usefulness. 40K is obviously the most grimdark, then the old world, then Age of Sigmar, which is closest to high fantasy. It practically is high fantasy. But yeah, no, I'm rambling too long. Absolutely love this franchise. I had a bit of a falling out with it because of really messed up stuff I saw going on for a while. Now I'm kind of back into it, kind of enjoy it. Am looking forward to making more content in this universe. The thing about me covering Warhammer 40K, though, really is that when it comes to, I would say, when it comes to me doing things in this universe, there's already such an oversaturation of content out there, and I would probably want to focus primarily on philosophy or a dissection of it. People like it when I do theory crafting. People like that in Conan. I'm going to try that out in 40K as well. I also like studying that lore.